He walked into a five-star hotel with nothing but a reservation and his name. They looked at him, then past him, as if presence could be erased with silence. But when the truth stepped through the door wearing heels and authority, the rules changed for everyone in the room. This isn't just a story about being ignored, it's about what happens when the world is finally forced to look. The marble floors gleamed like they had never been walked on, polished to perfection, reflecting the light from towering crystal chandeliers that dripped elegance over everything beneath them. Jalen Carter stepped through the glass doors of the Halston Royale with a small suitcase in one hand and a folded reservation email in the other. His clothes were clean but rumpled from travel. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just a black button-up, jeans, and worn leather boots. He had just landed 2 hours ago, after a 14-hour flight from Lisbon, his first time back in the city in over 3 years. The doorman didn't greet him. Not with a nod, not with a, "Welcome, sir." He just glanced and turned back to his conversation. Jalen kept walking, adjusting the strap of his bag, not thinking much of it. He was tired, jet-lagged. But there was something familiar in the silence, the kind that clings to you when people decide who you are before you speak. The reception desk stood beneath a gold-trimmed sign that read, "Excellence lives here." 2 receptionists were typing furiously, smiling at the guest in front of them, a middle-aged man in a tan blazer. As he walked away, Jalen stepped forward. One of the women, tall and blonde with icy lipstick and perfect posture, looked at him with a kind of mechanical professionalism that didn't reach her eyes. "Good afternoon," Jalen said. "I have a reservation under Carter. Jalen Carter." She clicked on her keyboard, her nails sharp against the keys. Her name tag read, "Jessica Lowry, Guest Relations Manager." She squinted at the screen. "I'm sorry. Did you say Carter?" "Yes. Booked it last month. Penthouse suite. Check-in today." She typed again. Then again, and once more for good measure, though her face told him the answer had already formed before the first click. "I don't see anything under that name," she said. Jalen pulled out his phone calmly. "Here's the confirmation. Email, number, everything." She barely glanced at the screen. "I understand," she said too quickly. "But if it's not in our system, there's not much I can do." He blinked. "Maybe try checking under the confirmation number instead?" She hesitated, then typed something again. Her screen flickered. Then her expression stiffened. "I'm sorry, but I still don't see anything matching your details." From the corner of his eye, Jalen saw a man in a suit approach the desk and get checked in within 60 seconds. He wasn't asked for a confirmation. He wasn't told to wait. "I booked this suite weeks ago," Jalen said, still level. "It was prepaid." "I believe you think that," she replied. That stopped him cold. "I believe you think that?" Jessica folded her hands. "Sir, perhaps you made a mistake with the hotel. There are a few others in the area with similar names. This is the Halston Royale, correct?" "Yes." "Then I'm exactly where I need to be." A silence bloomed between them. Not loud, just uncomfortable. She shifted. "You're welcome to wait in the lounge while I look into it further." "I'd rather wait here." Jessica nodded slowly and stepped into a side room, murmuring something to another staff member. Jalen stood at the desk, suddenly very aware of the polished counter beneath his palms. The lights above him felt hotter now. A man in line behind him gave an impatient sigh. Another receptionist glanced at him, then away. He waited. 10 minutes. No one returned. Finally, he stepped away from the desk and walked toward a leather chair in the lobby. As he sat down, he caught the subtle looks from staff, not hostile, but uncertain, like he didn't quite belong there. Like he might be something other than a guest. Jalen stared at the lobby's wall of awards and framed magazine covers. The Halston Royale was a 5-star beacon, a place of world-class discretion and luxury, one article boasted. He'd read that same phrase back when he chose this hotel. Chose it not just because it was close to where he grew up, but because he wanted to surprise someone. He rubbed his hands together slowly, not from cold, but from memory. His last visit home had ended in conflict. His mother told him he needed to see the world for himself. He did, and now he had returned. But some things hadn't changed. Jessica emerged from the side office and walked back to the desk. She didn't call him over. She didn't wave. She simply spoke with another guest, pretending he wasn't there. After a moment, Jalen stood up and approached her again. "Is there an update?" Her face stiffened. "Sir, as I mentioned earlier, your name doesn't appear in our reservation system. Then maybe try again." Jessica blinked. "I'm afraid if you continue to raise your voice, I'll have to ask you to leave." Jalen's voice hadn't risen once. But he understood the code. He'd heard it before. It wasn't about decibels. It was about presence, about discomfort, about being seen. He took a breath, then calmly pulled out his passport and placed it on the counter. "My name is Jalen Carter. I paid for the penthouse suite. And if you're going to treat me like a problem, at least have the courtesy to do it with transparency." Jessica opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the doors behind him opened with a whoosh, and the room changed. The automatic doors hissed open and closed behind him, but Jalen didn't turn around. The shift in energy was immediate, subtle but real. He could feel it in the way the air recalibrated itself, the way Jessica's expression faltered, the way a murmur seemed to pass through the lobby like a ripple across still water. Then a voice, low, calm, and completely in control. "Is there a reason my son hasn't been checked into his room?" Jessica blinked as if slapped by the question. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Jalen turned. Standing at the entrance of the Halston Royale was a woman dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. No jewelry, no handbag, just a phone in one hand and posture that made men in boardrooms sit straighter. Her heels clicked softly as she walked across the floor, controlled, focused. Each step made people notice her, whether they knew who she was or not. Raina Carter, his mother, the owner of the hotel. Jessica scrambled for composure. "Mrs. Carter, we weren't aware." Raina didn't look at her. Her eyes stayed on Jalen. "Have they offered you water?" she asked him. "No." "Did anyone check your ID?" "They pretended the reservation didn't exist." Raina nodded slowly, then finally turned toward the desk. "I'd like the guest log, please," she said to Jessica, her tone flat. Jessica fumbled behind the counter, nearly knocking over a vase of orchids. A tablet was handed over with trembling hands. Raina scanned it quickly. Her finger stopped halfway down the list. "Here's the reservation. Jalen A. Carter, confirmed 4 weeks ago, paid in full. Penthouse suite, room 2401. She looked up. "Would you care to explain why my son was left standing in your lobby like a stray?" Jessica swallowed hard. I didn't recognize the name, and the system." "You didn't try to recognize it," Raina cut in. "Let's not insult each other further." Around them, the lobby had fallen silent. A bellhop who had been pushing a luggage cart paused behind a column. The concierge pretended to tidy up a stack of brochures, hands shaking just slightly. Jalen stood perfectly still, letting the moment hang, letting the weight of it settle on everyone except himself. Raina's voice softened, but it didn't lose power. "This hotel operates on one principle. You treat every guest like they belong. Because they do. That includes the ones who look like my son." Jessica's cheeks flushed red. She opened her mouth again. "I don't need your apology," Raina said quickly. "I need your resignation. You can submit it to HR by the end of the day." A sharp inhale came from someone behind the desk. Jalen looked at his mother. Her expression hadn't changed. Calm, steady, and furious in a way that didn't need volume. Jessica stood frozen. "And Carol," Raina added without turning, "please escort Mr. Carter to his suite personally, and make sure the room is prepared to my standards." The second receptionist, Carol, nodded quickly, flustered. "Yes, ma'am. Of course. Right away." As Carol fumbled for the key card, Raina turned back to Jalen. "Do you want to stay here tonight?" Jalen didn't answer right away. Then, "Yeah, I want to see how they treat me now." His mother gave a small, grim smile. "Good." Carol led him toward the elevator, apologizing under her breath. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered already, louder than any confrontation. A reckoning had arrived, and this time it wore a tailored suit and walked in without knocking. Upstairs, the suite was immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, silk curtains, a view of the skyline that made the city look soft and gold. A welcome tray had been added in haste, a bottle of sparkling water, a fruit basket, a handwritten card that read, "Welcome, Mr. Carter. We're honored to have you." He didn't touch it. He stood at the window for a long time, watching the traffic move below. The glass reflected a version of himself that looked calm, but underneath, the engine was still running. 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door. He opened it to find his mother there, holding 2 coffees. "I figured you might need this," she said. He stepped aside. She walked in, handed him a cup, and sat down on the velvet bench at the foot of the bed. Jalen leaned against the wall. "They saw me," he said, "and they still chose to treat me like I didn't belong." Raina stirred her coffee slowly. "People don't always see, not really. They see skin, clothes, posture. They assign meaning and move on. But they knew the name. You said it was right there." "They saw what they wanted to see," she said, "which was nothing." Silence filled the room like fog. Jalen spoke again. "Why didn't you tell them who I was when you walked in?" "Because I shouldn't have to," Raina replied. "You're not someone who needs to be defended. You're someone who needs to be recognized." He looked down at his coffee. "Still feels like I only mattered once you walked in." "I walked in to remind them of what they forgot. But you reminded them who you already were." They sat like that, in the quiet, until the city lights outside began to flicker on, one by one. The next morning, the hotel lobby looked the same. Immaculate marble, hushed tones, glistening fixtures. But it felt entirely different. Staff moved with a kind of alertness that had nothing to do with efficiency. They avoided eye contact. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Behind the front desk, Carol stood rigid, answering phones in short, clipped tones. Jessica's absence was noticeable in its own way, like a missing column in a carefully arranged temple. No one asked why she wasn't there. No one had to. Jalen stepped off the elevator in a fresh shirt and clean lines. He didn't wear anything flashy, just black slacks and a dark gray pullover, but the way he carried himself turned heads. He didn't mean to command attention. It simply followed him now. At the concierge desk, a young man named Ellis greeted him with the kind of overcompensating warmth that screamed training session panic. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. How can I help you today?" Jalen tilted his head slightly. "Just grabbing coffee." "Excellent, sir. There's a complimentary espresso bar set up near the conservatory. Would you like me to escort you?" "I think I can find it." "Of course. Let me know if you need anything. Anything at all." Jalen gave a nod and walked away, the weight of every glance brushing his shoulders. In the lounge, he found his mother seated at a corner table, reviewing documents on her tablet. She looked up as he approached, offered a short smile, and gestured to the seat across from her. "I hear you're already a legend on the second floor," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't say anything, didn't do anything. Just showed up. That's the problem, isn't it?" He sipped his coffee. It was good, expensive, probably flown in from somewhere with a name people liked to mispronounce. But it still tasted bitter. "So what now?" he asked. Raina tapped her screen. I've issued a statement to the staff. This afternoon we're holding a meeting with department heads. I've brought in an external consultant for a training overhaul. Unconscious bias, racial equity, the works. He said nothing. She added, and yes, this isn't the first time I've had to address this. But it's the first time it happened to someone with my last name. That makes it harder for them to ignore. Jalen exhaled, slow and long. You think it'll change anything? Some things, she said. Not all. Culture doesn't shift because of one moment, but moments like this crack the surface. He leaned back in his chair. You're used to being the one in control. I'm used to being the one who has to be. The meeting took place in the executive conference room, a sweeping space with floor-to-ceiling windows and chairs that cost more than most people's rent. Jalen didn't sit at the table. He stood in the back corner, arms crossed, watching. Department heads filed in, dressed in crisp suits and curated expressions. A few nodded to him, others avoided his eyes. When Raina entered, the room hushed. She stood at the head of the table without any notes. Yesterday, she began, a guest was treated with suspicion, delay, and disregard. That guest happened to be my son. But that isn't what made this a problem. What made it a problem was that this wasn't unique. It was familiar and predictable. No one spoke. She continued, I've read the reports. I've seen the incident reviews. Language like miscommunication and failure to verify does not apply here. What applies is this. You made a decision based on appearance, and in this hotel, that is unacceptable. A man in a navy suit raised a hand. Mrs. Carter, with all due respect. Respect doesn't start with but, Mr. Kessler. He lowered his hand. We will be implementing mandatory training, revising our hiring protocols, and reviewing all guest interaction data for the last 18 months. If you feel this doesn't align with your values, you are welcome to step down. Silence. Raina scanned the room. Dismissed. As people shuffled out, Jalen remained in his corner, unmoving. When the last person left, he finally stepped forward. Is that how it always works? He asked. One meeting, one memo, and everything resets? No, she said. But it starts there. He nodded slowly. You ever get tired of having to start things? All the time. Back in his suite, Jalen sat at the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. His inbox had grown overnight. A few journalists had reached out, a former professor, even an old high school classmate he hadn't spoken to in years. All of them wanted to talk, to ask what happened, to spin a moment into a message. He ignored them. Instead, he opened the Notes app and began typing something simple, a sentence he couldn't stop thinking about. They didn't forget who I was. They never tried to learn. He stared at it for a while, then added another line. But now they have no choice. As the city lights blinked on beyond the glass, Jalen felt something shift. Not closure, that was a myth, but something else, something closer to truth. And this time, it was permanent. The spotlight had faded, but its warmth lingered. Not the comfortable kind, more like the burn that stays after you've stood too close to a fire for too long. Jalen felt it in his chest as he sat in the rooftop lounge 2 nights later, a glass of water sweating beside him and his phone face down on the table. Notifications were relentless. Articles, reposts, think pieces with titles like, What the Halston Incident Reveals About Everyday Bias. Everyone suddenly had an opinion about what happened to him, except him. He hadn't spoken to any reporters, hadn't tweeted, hadn't told his side. But still, people were telling it for him, like he'd become a symbol, something to retweet, dissect, applaud, criticize, and then forget. And as much as he understood the moment mattered, he hated how it was being packaged. His mother joined him quietly, slipping into the seat across from him. She wore a long black coat over a navy jumpsuit, heels silent on the stone floor. Her presence was familiar, but different now. as if the moment had drawn a line between them neither of them had asked for. "You're quiet," she said after a while. "I've been quiet. I meant differently." He didn't answer. Raina leaned back, looking out at the city. "I heard there's a podcast episode about you now. 2 college girls breaking down your posture and tone like it's some kind of case study." Jalen exhaled. "I didn't ask to be anyone's lesson." "No one ever does." He looked at her. "You've dealt with this longer than I have. How do you not get numb to it?" "I didn't say I wasn't numb," she said. "I just learned how to move with it." They sat in silence for a moment, the soft hum of the city filling the space between them. Then Jalen spoke again. "I'm not mad at what happened exactly. I'm mad that it felt expected, like part of me saw it coming the second I walked in that lobby." Raina nodded slowly. "Because we learned to brace for impact even before the crash. I didn't want to brace, I just wanted to check in." He picked up his phone, scrolled through the unread messages, then set it back down. "They want me to speak at a panel," he said. "Some diversity thing, sponsored by a brand that once got caught discriminating against their own staff. Let me guess. They want you to tell your story so they can call it progress?" He smirked. "Something like that." She folded her hands. "You can say no, I know. But you can also say yes, and say it your way." He didn't respond right away. The next morning, Jalen returned to the lobby. The front desk staff was new, rotated or replaced. No one flinched when he walked in. One of the attendants smiled and greeted him properly. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. Anything we can assist you with today?" "Just observing," he said, walking past. He made his way into the employee hallway, where staff clocked in, where uniforms were kept, where guests weren't supposed to go. A few team members looked surprised to see him, but no one stopped him. He found the training room, lights off, and peeked inside. Stacks of new materials were laid out on the tables: bias awareness, cultural accountability, the guest behind the profile. He didn't open any of them. He didn't need to. Later, while walking through the lounge area, he noticed a mother and her teenage daughter standing near the elevators. The girl wore a hoodie and carried a robotics book tucked under her arm. She looked nervous, as if she wasn't sure whether she was supposed to be there. The mother caught Jalen's eye. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you the guy from the hotel story?" He froze for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah." The woman smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter read about you in class. Her teacher used your story as part of a media literacy unit." The girl looked up. "They didn't believe you, right? At first?" "No," he said. "They didn't." The girl nodded. "I know what that's like." Jalen crouched a little, so they were eye to eye. "Then you already know more than most." She smiled. "Just a little." The elevator chimed. They stepped in. The doors closed. That evening, Jalen returned to his suite, opened his laptop, and created a new folder on his desktop. He titled it, Redefining the Guest. Inside, he began to draft something he never expected to write. Not a speech, not an op-ed, but a framework. A proposal for how luxury institutions could rebuild their policies around presence instead of profile. He didn't know if anyone would use it, but he needed it to exist. He paused halfway through and wrote a single line at the top of the document. Not every guest needs to be welcomed with a smile, but none should be received with a warning. And for the first time since that day in the lobby, he felt like the room was finally his. A month later, the lobby didn't feel the same, not because the chandeliers had changed or the floors were any less polished, but because something beneath the surface had shifted. The Halston Royale now moved differently. The smiles weren't forced. The greetings weren't filtered. There was a new kind of stillness in the air, not the old kind that whispered, "You don't belong here," but the quiet that comes when a space has been told the truth and can no longer pretend it didn't hear it. Jalen stepped through the rotating doors, not as a guest, not as a headline, but as someone returning by choice. He wore no name tag, no badge, no tailored statement piece, just a simple shirt and dark jeans. But the staff greeted him anyway, not because they knew who he was, but because they'd been taught to look this time, to see. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," said the new front desk associate, a young man named Isaiah with warm eyes and no trace of fear in his voice. "Your meeting room is ready whenever you are." "Appreciate it," Jalen said. He passed through the corridor that once felt like a threshold between being seen and being stopped. Now it was just a hallway, nothing more, and maybe that was the point. Upstairs, in one of the medium-sized event rooms, a group of interns from the hotel's new Equity and Leadership Initiative were gathered, most of them young, many of them first-generation students, several from neighborhoods like the one Jalen grew up in. He stepped into the room and scanned their faces. Some looked nervous, a few looked skeptical, but one or two held the expression he'd once had sitting across from a professor who finally said something real. He didn't start with a speech. He started with a question. "What's the first thing you think when you walk into a place like this?" he asked. One girl raised her hand. "Don't break anything." The room chuckled. Another added, "Act like you've been here before, even if you haven't." Jalen nodded. "Exactly. And who taught you that?" They hesitated, shrugged, looked down. He let the silence breathe, then said, "The truth is, half of navigating places like this isn't about learning the rules. It's about unlearning the fear." He told them about the incident, briefly, without theatrics. He talked about what came after, the calls, the attention, the way everyone suddenly wanted to put him on a panel or in a podcast, as if his experience was some kind of exotic lesson plan. "But what changed the most," he said, "was me. I stopped waiting for someone else to rewrite the manual." He walked over to the table at the front and picked up a folder. Inside was the training framework he'd drafted weeks ago. The same one that had now been adopted by 2 other hotels in the city. He handed out copies. "This isn't just policy," he said. "It's perspective. Yours, mine, ours." One of the interns, a tall boy in a green hoodie, raised his hand. "But what if no one listens?" Jalen smiled. "Then you speak louder, or you build something they can't ignore." After the session ended, a few students lingered. One of them, a quiet girl who hadn't spoken the entire time, approached him near the window. "I just wanted to say, I used to work front desk at another hotel," she said. "And I know how easy it is to fall into those patterns. You taught us that it's not enough to be polite. You have to be present." Jalen nodded. "That's the part they don't train you on, but it's the part that matters most." She thanked him and left. He stood by the window for a moment, looking down at the street, people moving, unaware, uninterested. And yet, somehow it felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because a small part of it had been rewritten. That evening, he sat across from his mother on the same rooftop where so much had begun. The sun was dipping behind the skyline, turning every window gold. "They're naming the fellowship after you," Raina said. "The new leadership track for equity hires." He raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't necessary." "It wasn't for you," she replied. "It was for everyone who walks in after you." He sipped his drink, letting the moment stretch. "You ever think about how many people never got that moment? Never got seen?" She looked at him. "Every day." Jalen leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I think I'm finally ready to speak. Not as a victim, not as a symbol, just as someone who lived it." Raina reached into her bag and pulled out a small object, a new room key, engraved on one side with the initials JC and on the other a quote. The door stayed closed until someone asked the right way. He turned it over in his hand. "You kept the suite reserved for me?" he asked. "I kept the space open," she said. "You filled it." Later, alone in his room, Jalen stood by the window and watched the lights flicker on across the city. In another life, maybe he would have walked away. Let the moment pass. Let the lesson fall silent. But not this time. This time, he stayed. And somewhere below, another guest, unknown, unnoticed, walked through the front door of the Halston Royale and was met with a smile. No questions. No delay. Just a welcome, the way it should have always been. Share your opinion about this story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss new stories.